Hello and welcome back to the second week of MC101 Mass Communication and Society. Once again, we're continuing what should be a face-to-face course in online meetings on Moodle simply because I'm not able physically to return to the classroom at this time. That's a decision that's up to my surgeon, and I'll keep you posted on improvements there and give you plenty of advance notice when we're going to begin meeting face-to-face. Chapter 2 and 3 are on our schedule for this second week of the course. We're going to be dealing with Chapter 2 today, which is all about media technology. Now, I don't know about you, but I consider myself to be pretty much a geek kind of technology person when it comes to the mass media. And if it's something new that makes the content easier to read or to listen to or to watch, I'm all over that. And it's just a part of who I am. Now, to what extent you're a technology person, well, maybe as much as I am, perhaps maybe a little bit less. But at any rate, we're going to be looking and talking about the four basic types of media technology that have dominated the mass media for the last, throughout its history, for the last 500 plus years. You see the four terms in red on the screen: print, chemical, electronic, digital, and we're going to discuss each one of these briefly in this lesson and take them top to bottom order, and that reflects their chronological development. Print was the earliest, digital the most recent. And I will note that the use of chemical technology as a form of mass media platform delivery is going by the wayside. And this change is rather recent. It's happened within the past 5 years or so. So I'll have more to say about that just a little bit later in the lesson. What you see on the screen is an image of the video that appeared on the A&E channel on their program Biography about 17 years ago. Produced in 1999 and broadcast in 2000, the program is called The Biography of the Millennium, of the last 1,000 years. The producers of this program went to influential people around the world, people who were established leaders in, let's say, political thought, in religious thought, people who were accomplished in the arts, people who were TV and movie and recording stars, people who were prominent in the sports world. Just imagine a nice collection, 500 important people around the world. And the producers of the program asked each of these 500 people, who, in your opinion, was the most influential person to live in the last 1,000 years. Last 1,000, the millennium. Now, I can tell you, if we were meeting face to face, what we would do at this point, I would ask for a show of hands and ask for people to volunteer who you think might have made the list. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for several years in the classroom, and we get people like George Washington, we get people like Thomas Jefferson, some of the country's leaders, Abraham Lincoln, we get religious leaders, we get Gandhi, we get the Reverend Billy Graham, we get a variety of popes that are named, Adolf Hitler, leader of the German Nazi movement during World War II. Believe it or not, it gets named simply because, for good or for bad, he certainly was an influential person. So who do you think that the 500 people around the world, these 500 important people, thought the most influential person who lived on Earth from the period of 1000 AD to 1999 AD? That's the 1,000-year span that we're talking about. Well, out on the course homepage of Moodle, I have the video of this program available to you. It's about 3 hours long. So here's an important thing that I want you to note. Look at the very bottom of the screen, and for one reason or another, it looks like one of our digits has been chopped off here. When you click on this video, it takes you to the entire program. What I'd like for you to do is advance in your media player, advance to the point where you're into the video 2 hours, 53 seconds, and 51, let's try this again. 2 hours, 53 minutes, and 51 seconds into the video. And what that's going to do is to take you right to that point where the host of the show begins talking about the number one person of the millennium. And I can tell you that when we do this brainstorming activity in class in prior semesters, very, very few people have suggested who they think the number one person of the millennium was. Well, it turns out that that person is Johannes Gutenberg. Who do you say? Johannes Gutenberg, the person credited with the invention of movable metal type, which led to the invention of the printing press. Now, second bullet point here, focus on the impact of Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. And here's what we need to understand before we watch the video. Prior to the printing press, we were a world of people, and of course this is before the United States even exists, but particularly in the areas of Central Europe, the world consisted of people who relied on oral traditions to hand the traditions of culture and family and history from one generation to the next. It occurred orally. One generation shared this information with the next generation, and the next generation, and so on. Very little information was written down on paper simply because there was no really plausible way to do this. Gutenberg's invention of the printing press revolutionized communication because it made possible the ability to move beyond handwritten information on paper to where metal type could be coated with ink, and this ink then could be impressed on paper, and it could be done multiple times in a rather short period of time. So, for example, the very first thing that Gutenberg is printing is the Holy Bible. Copies of the Bible that existed prior to that time had to be handwritten by monks in monasteries, and it may take a group of monks months or years to reproduce by handwriting another edition of the Holy Bible. Gutenberg's printing press reduced that time probably by a factor of 100 or perhaps even 1,000. So, what's the impact here? The spread of religion around the world. The spread of business through commercialization becomes much more doable, for lack of the better word, becomes much more doable thanks to the ability of the press to disseminate greater amounts of information over a larger and wider geographic area. And then the video is going to explain these bullet points to you, but I want to focus for just a moment on this business of correctable science because I just find this a rather appealing and very interesting observation here, and that is that prior to the invention of the printing press, the beliefs of the people about science as it pertained to the world, to the earth, and to biology in plant life and animal life, there was a lot that was known, but probably even more so that was unknown. And by printing this information on paper using the Gutenberg press and circulating this multiple copies to wider and wider regions of Europe and other parts of the world, we have more and more people reading, studying, thinking about science, conducting their own experiments, making their own discoveries, and coming to the conclusions that, well, for example, maybe the earth is not flat, as people had been thinking for the last thousands of years. Maybe it's a sphere. Maybe it's a round sphere, not a flat plane. And so as the research and the discoveries and the observations continued, as this information was updated in print, circulated to people again, they began to think about it, conduct even more research, conduct more experiments. Pardon me, but the microphone just collapsed on me. It becomes a a situation where science achieves a level of accuracy like we have never known. Well, it's all going to be explained to you in the video, so I'll move us ahead and talk about another major revolution in the history of the printing press that occurred in the 1830s. What you're looking at here is the whole rotary press, and the significance of this is that unlike Gutenberg's press, which for its time was fairly rapid and fairly modern, the Hoe press, the rotary press, makes possible now the ability to print newspapers in particular, maybe more so than books or magazines, but to print newspapers by the thousands of copies per hour, not by the tens or the hundreds, but by the thousands. And when you can make a product available like that, by making so many of that product in such a short period of time, that enables the publisher of the newspaper to lower the price. And when the price can be lowered, more people can afford to purchase the newspaper. So what's the end result there? Newspapers that for a couple of hundred years could be purchased and read only by people of financial stability, all of a sudden middle class and lower class Americans are able to purchase a newspaper and learn of what's going on in their world. So it's a really important point that you study in Chapter 2 of the textbook. I said earlier that we would come back to this idea of chemistry technology. Chemistry in the sense that photography, both still photography and later on motion picture, bringing the illusion of movement to photography, is a chemical-based process. At least it had been for 150 or so years. Today we understand photography to be a digital process. Our smartphones have cameras in them, 2 cameras as a matter of fact, or 2 lenses, and that's a digital process. When we go to the movies today, we watch movies that are not shot, not produced by using cameras that work on film, which is a product of chemistry, but rather with video cameras that record a digital image. And the projectors are not like the projectors of old that for many years would shine through a piece of film, but rather use the video techniques of television to project an image onto the screen. Now, I've thrown in a YouTube video just for fun. It's only about 1.5 minutes long. Your textbook author talks about how movies first began to really catch on with the American public because, what is a movie? It's a still photograph or a series of still photographs that have been rapidly projected and literally brought to life. And he talks about a phenomenon, a psychological phenomenon called the persistence of vision. And so this little video, I'd like for you to watch that. It pertains to animation, which is sort of an offshoot of motion picture photography. And it explains to you this illusion. And it is that. It is an illusion. We don't watch movement. We watch the illusion of movement. Another piece of technology that I want to mention briefly, page 36, is where you'd find the discussion of the great American inventor, Thomas Edison, a person I've long admired and been interested in. He is the person who, in the United States, developed the first sound recording and playback device. Interesting, well, I say perhaps you've heard of this before, maybe not. When Edison invented his phonograph, which is the term that he gave to this recording and playback machine, he really didn't picture it as a device for recording and playing back music. He thought it was more like a dictation recorder for use in business offices, or maybe perhaps to record the voices of famous politicians for archival purposes. But time has a way of changing things, and even if Edison's thoughts about what the phonograph could become weren't exactly on target, it nonetheless became a very popular form of mass media delivery. Now, take a look at this device that's pictured on the right-hand side of your screen. Do you have any idea what's going on there? I suspect you have a pretty good idea. This is, and you know what that phrase home theater means today? Perhaps some of you come from homes where you have a room dedicated as a home theater. And maybe there's a great big screen TV in there and loudspeakers scattered across the area to bring sound in from all directions, and maybe big comfy plush chairs to sit back and watch the movies and the TV shows. Well, this is the equivalent of it in the 1950s. This is a home entertainment center. This is home theater at its finest in the 1950s. What you see right here, if the mouse will follow it, is the TV image. This TV set is all of about 15 inches in diameter, which means you have to sit about 3 feet away from this thing. If you get more than 3 feet away, the image becomes kind of blurry. We have a phonograph here for playing 78 RPM records. You could put a stack of vinyl records on this player and get maybe about, 15 or 20 minutes of continuous music. And here is a radio receiver for AM radio broadcast. So, not exactly state of the art today, but it was in the 1950s. We want to put our focus and emphasis on radio and television broadcasting for just a moment, because in Chapter 2 you get your first introduction to what is called, and I know that this is a phrase that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you, the electromagnetic spectrum. That's a fancy scientific phrase that I'm going to boil down into something that I hope is a little easier for you to understand. Whenever you see the phrase electromagnetic spectrum, think about the airspace that surrounds us, because it is through this airspace that wireless electronic signals from radio, television, and yes, smartphones travels without any impediment, travels at the speed of electricity at 186,000 miles per second. This is what enables the technology to become wireless. These electronic signals, these invisible electronic signals that travel through the air. And we're going to, as the slide indicates, we'll be talking about that at greater length in, let's go back to this slide. SMCR. The S stands for sender, SENDER. The M stands for message, MESSAGE. The C for channel, CHANNEL, and the R for receiver, RECEIVER. Those arrows are pointing to the right. They're indicating that something with the S then moves to the M, then it moves to the C, then it moves to the R. That's why we call it the linear model of mass communication. Let me give you a couple of examples. We talked about print mass communication, books, newspapers, magazines. I'll take an example of a newspaper. Many of you in the class come from the St. Louis area, so we'll use the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a highly respected newspaper, not only in St. Louis, but respected around the United States and the world as being one of the great newspapers of all time. So let's think about the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper as being the sender of a message. Now, what is that message? That message is an edition of the day's newspaper. And all of the news information, all of the advertising, all of the photographs, all of the funny pages, everything that you think about associated with the content of the newspaper, that is the message. That message is distributed from the sender to the R. The R is the receiver. Now, more specifically, the R is the reader of the newspaper. But in between the message and the receiver is the channel. For purposes of our discussion, think about the channel as being the way that the sender communicates that message to the reader. And the way that it does that is by taking ink and putting it onto paper. The ink forms words that we, with our literacy, are capable of reading and understanding. So, sender, the Post-Dispatch sends a message, the newspaper, by printing ink on paper and then distributing it to us as the readers of the newspaper. That's one explanation for how mass communication works in the world of print. Now, another way that we could look at this maybe is from the electronic. Let's take radio or television. Let's take TV, since it's the more recent of the two to develop. And we could look at the sender. Let's take, for instance, how about the CBS television network? And the CBS TV network brings a situation comedy to us each week called The Big Bang Theory. That program is the message. It just so happens to be the most watched of all of the situation comedies over all of the TV networks, so I think it makes a pretty good example for us. So CBS sends a message called The Big Bang Theory to us as the R, the receivers, except more specifically for TV, we'll call ourselves the viewers. But we haven't explained the C yet, and this is where things get a little more difficult. Think about the C as the electromagnetic spectrum. Remember our discussion of that about 5 slides back? And the electromagnetic spectrum, I said a better way maybe to think of that, an easier way, is to think of it as the airspace in which these invisible electronic signals travel. The TV station broadcasts the program to us. It gets to us, or it gets more specifically to our individual TV sets, by traveling through the air. And so in this instance, the C represents the airspace, and that is how the message gets from the sender to us, the receiver, or more specifically, the viewer. Now, here's something really important that I'd like for you to be thinking about, and that is the C in this model. When we talk about the print media, we're talking about ink on paper. And in that instance, we're talking about property, physical property, that can be 100% owned by an individual. Now, what do I mean by that? I want to contrast that with the broadcast side of this, where the channel represents the airspace above us and surrounds us. Because my question then becomes, who owns the airspace? Who owns the air in which these invisible electronic signals travel? And the fact of the matter is that the airspace is not owned by any one individual. In fact, it's not really owned by anyone, or perhaps maybe it is. Maybe it's owned by the government. And who is the government? Well, the government is we the people. Maybe we all collectively own the airspace. None of us own it individually, but all of us own it collectively. It's a natural resource. It's much like our natural parks. You know, sometimes I mention this question: who owns the Arch in St. Louis? Well, I hope that you know that the Arch is part of a national monument. It is owned by the federal government. And who's the federal government? Well, we the people are the federal government. So while none of us own the Arch individually, collectively, we all own the Arch. And the government administers its use in such a way that it provides the maximum benefit to the largest number of people. Well, that's a pretty good corollary, because our United States government does exactly the same thing with the airspace. There is a federal agency called the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, created by Congress in 1934 to administer access to the airwaves by broadcasters and other users. And by other users, I guess nowadays I mean all of us, because if you stop and think about it, our smartphones are nothing more than miniature radio and TV stations where we communicate with one another, except that it's personal communication as opposed to mass communication. So, SMCR as a means of explaining how this business of mass communication works. So do you feel comfortable in understanding the two different instances that we talked about in print and in broadcast, how this model can help us better understand how the business of mass communication works, how it's accomplished? Because I can tell you that for the remainder of the semester, at various times when appropriate, we will be coming back to this model, and I'll be making comments about how, as we study these various forms of communication, how everything does conform to this SMCR model. This page of electrical technology information is just sort of a summarization of some of the information that I've already spoken to you about. With the exception, look down at the information on television and the name Philo Farnsworth. Now, my guess is that's probably a name that you're not familiar with. And my guess is if you walked out on the street and asked 100 people who Philo Farnsworth was, they probably, 99 out of 100 probably will say, well, I've never heard of Philo Farnsworth. Well, let's suffice it to say that we can credit Mr. Farnsworth, who as a young 14-year-old farm boy in the upper Midwest first envisioned what we know today as television. It's not entirely correct to say that he invented television. Maybe some people do. Maybe the better way of looking at it is to say that he developed the technology that led to television as we know it today. And so on the calendar homepage of our Moodle course, please take a look for that YouTube video about Philo Farnsworth. I'm going to wrap up and just leave this screen available to you to think about. Just some ways to see if you're doing a good job in comprehending the information that I'm explaining to you. Are you comprehending what your textbook author is presenting to you in the textbook? And some of these questions have as their basis Chapter 2 in the textbook for you to think about. So we'll call an end to our session on Chapter 2 today. Just take a look at these videos that are out on YouTube under the second calendar week, the 101 gadgets. I didn't speak about that in particular, but I thought you might be interested in seeing what a poll of this is much like this biography of the millennium, although much more recently, when the A&E channel conducted a survey of some, I think it was about 100 important people in the United States, and asked them what were the 100 most influential gadgets that had ever been invented or developed. I'm not asking you to watch the entire program, okay? You can follow the lead that will take you down. I would like for you to look at the top 5 gadgets that are presented. They're presented in chronological order, so you're going very close to the end of the video to watch these. But I think, interestingly enough, it's the opinion of these experts that at least 4 out of the 5 most influential, most important gadgets that have ever been developed, 4 out of the 5 of them pertain in some way to the mass media. So I hope that you enjoy watching that. And then let me wrap up by suggesting that you spend some time watching the CBS News video about literacy. And I think this is a good place for us to wrap up. Take a look at the story of this, I believe he's 89 years old at the time this video news report was produced about 2 years ago. This veteran of World War II, one of what is called the greatest generation. And interestingly enough, this man worked all of his professional life holding a very deep secret. And that secret was that he did not know how to read. Watch the story and then think for a moment, what would your life be if you were not literate, if you did not have the ability to look at symbols on the page, understand them as words, words that are connected together into sentences and into paragraphs, and think about where your life is today because somebody or some bodies, plural, taught you how to read. And then look at this story and look at how his life changes in his upper 80s when he finally is taught and makes the connection and learns how to read. I really do hope that you'll watch this, and I hope you'll enjoy what you see, and give a shout out to all the people in your life that have helped you learn how to read, because it is that important. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll continue next time in Chapter 3. That's all about media economics. So until then, please take care.